Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Choose Inclusion. I am here with my wonderful co hosts, as always, Mike and Yubi. Mike and Yubi, how are you today?
I feel pretty dang good. I'm excited for today's guest.
Yeah, I agree. I got my coffee, I got my friends, an amazing guest. Yeah, I'm excited for today.
Yeah, me too, me too. So today we have Dee Marshall. She's the CEO of Diverse and Engage, and we're going to be talking about some heavy hitting stuff and also some really great tactical things as well for companies to be doing. But first, I want to thank Dee for coming. And how are you today?
Hello there. You know what? I'm pretty good, all things considered. I will say, I think in the last few days, probably a bit of mixed emotions in that I'm excited for the year. A lot of great things happening at the company and in the way of inclusion, and so all of that stuff is very exciting. And then excited about a hard reset. I love the beginning of the year, but also a little bit of previous year and season energy shows up a bit. So it's a struggle to stay focused. Let's just say that.
I hear you. I hear you. So, can you tell us a little bit about kind of what is Diverse and Engage and what's your background and how did you get to doing the work that you're doing today?
Sure, sure. So, Diverse and Engage, we are a leadership development, workplace culture, and diversity consulting practice. So, we like to say we speak those three languages. And our corporate clients in the Fortune 500 space, they retain us to either engage, train, or support diverse workplace culture. We have core competency in training and development. That's kind of where the leadership comes into play, or the leadership development comes into play. But we like to say we're uniquely brilliant at engagement. So engaging diverse pop, whether it's multicultural women, um, black and brown folks, LGBTQ, same gender, sex loving, we are really good at engaging. So we always say if you have a challenge attracting, engaging, or retaining diverse folks, invite us to the conversation and let us help you figure it out. But I would say all of that, um, or in all of that, our mission, our big why is really to help create a world where people can better connect, communicate, and respect unique differences, which is why I love the show that you all have here, because it's about respecting unique differences. Um, and so that's what we're about, the work that we do inside of the private sector. It's largely diversity and inclusion training, and everything from cultural competence to managing through in cultural through a multicultural lens. Some of our favorite work is moving from uncomfortable to comfortable conversations around race and identity. And so that's some of the work that we get to do, that we're privileged to do, and it's exciting stuff to support workplace culture. But that really comes out of our interest and concern about individuals, and how individuals are growing and evolving in corporate. Really interested in how folks are managing in terms of their psychological safety. So that's a little bit about diverse and engage. I also am a membership director for National Association for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, NADI, which is great work that we started following the launch of Diversity on the Hill. And then prior to this, I spent my career on Wall Street in training and development, and so that's my background. I'm a former Wall Street girl, a corporate. I like to say Wall Street alum. Not a corporate dropout, but a corporate. I matriculated out of the private sector and started my own firm here, and we get to do great work and meet great people like you all, and really hold space for the 9 to 5 community. So I hope that helps in terms of background.
That's a great summary. Thank you, Dee. I'm always super fascinated to talk to practitioners within this work, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, especially since your clientele is Fortune 10 and so really the largest companies in the world. I'd love to know some, if you don't mind sharing, just not all of your secret sauce, but just some of the secret sauce that you help these organizations with. I mean, to work with that type of clientele. You are obviously hitting home runs all the time. Do you mind sharing with our audience some of the actual techniques or maybe examples of exercises that you share with your Fortune 10 clients?
Sure, sure. I will say um, one of the one of the things that we bring to corporate, or I would say our unique value, is this X factor. So just having an external lens about people, about the community and Black and Brown, and other dimensions of diversity, kind of what people are up to, and because we have sort of influencer status in a couple of communities. So Google Tech Policy Influencer is one of the communities, and then there's several other communities that I belong to. And what that gives us, that along with, let's say, our Diversity on the Hill initiative, what it gives us is insight as to how corporations, or sort of what direction corporations should be going in to avoid some of the painful things that are happening where corporations are being called to testify before Congress about diversity and dimensions of diversity and not just gender diversity. And so we use sort of that X factor to inform and help advise on strategic direction. So, for instance, CEO. Or the top, bank CEOs were called to testify last year before Congress, and they had to testify about diversity. And so we use those relationships that we have, that insight, to then circle back and double down on with corporate. Here's what you might be thinking about as it pertains to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so then, if we go to the specific techniques, now that we have the insight, we look at experiential learning and development. And what I mean by that, Mike, is, a lot of what corporations are doing is training. They go immediately to training and development, right? Training and development, and it might look like bias training. It may look like, let's see, becoming an ally, or we don't find that a lot of folks do cultural competence until we come in, but that's typically where folks start. They start with ERGs and BRGs, but where there is a gap, and what we help them do is do experiential learning, experiential application. And the programs, it just takes what they're currently doing and what they have learned to apply that in some sort of, let's just say, it could be a community initiative, a community outreach initiative, right? So that's one example of what we mean by experiential learning and the kinds of things that we curate. Another would be, we plug them into Diversity on the Hill. What's that? Where we invite leaders specifically from our corporate clients to a Diversity on the Hill day. Why? Because that lets them learn about the various dimensions of diversity. It could be, ageism, ableism. It could be, dimensions ranging from, learning more about the interest of Latinx community, Asian American community, and not just always labeling or sticking to the buckets like BIPOC, right? And so that's another example of what we mean by experiential learning and experiential application, of where corporation has training, but they don't have application, and they are so far removed, or often I should say, we're so far removed from various populations, where it makes it uncomfortable to share space with with folks who have unique differences in terms of the range of dimensions of diversity. So I'll pause there, but I have to say, it's always, for us, our unique perspective and what we do here is really experiential and connecting directly to the communities, and reaching outside of the corporate walls.
Yeah, I mean that's incredible work, and I'm glad Mike brought that up because um, our audience really is. We're the reason we all started this podcast was to come together, and we're going to talk a little bit about how DEI has changed, but before it always seemed like anybody doing this work was on their own, right? An island, by themselves, trying to start one ERG, and so our goal was to be able to come together and bring those voices to the forefront so that we could all learn from each other and try to do more collectively. So yeah, it's really hard work. I One thing before we get into the DEI redefine, though, I did want to ask you, a big portion of that is you mentioned psychological safety. And we were talking before we started recording about, seasonal depression and those sorts of things. What's your focus there? Because it's timely, obviously. I mean, I think a lot of us are affected by that in some way or another. Over the holidays and just with the weather and things like that. So what's important about that discussion in particular?
Yeah, so the I think what's important about the question or the seasonal affective disorder, or others know it as a form of depression, which is now being re-languaged as low mood, I think. And what's important is, one, just to know where and when that window is, and that's where we are right now. So timing. But what's important in terms of the workplace, it's to identify ways that you know that you can normalize supporting employees. So, in other words, if in Q1 it could be that you incorporate discussion groups or reframe ERGs around themes that would help people challenge with seasonal affective disorder. What would that look like? It could be conversations around productivity, groups around productivity, groups around procrastination, because those are some of the things that show up in for those who might be presenting with low mood, is just being productive, or, oh, I'm procrastinating on this thing or that thing, right? So that might be a symptom of it. And so if corporate look for ways to normalize it rather than sending somebody to EAP, or, oh, you should see a therapist, because that says you have a problem, you have an issue, right? But if in this season with COVID and so many corporations still in work from home, find ways to normalize it, because I think you be Nina, Mike, if you think about it, that's inclusion in and of itself. Be inclusive even with not separating out people who are challenged for the moment. Does that make sense, UB? Am I does that make sense in terms of seasonal affective disorder and how how one might address that?
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic, and I love the clarification on how we're referring to it as well, because um, it is much more than just related to depression, for example, right? And so how do we start to really clarify and help people understand what it is, and then yeah, the tactical ways of addressing it. One of the ways that and Nina actually introduced this to our organization was is a simple traffic light check-in, and I say simple because it's very easy to implement and do. And basically, it's okay. Before every meeting, like in our first meeting of the day, for example, and we do this in a couple team meetings throughout the week. We ask everybody, what's your color? And green means you're good to go. Yellow means, I'm having a little bit of a rough start. Maybe, my coffee's cold, or there was traffic, or I'm affected by, the season, the environment right now, and things like that. Or red is, I'm not myself today, right? And that could be for a variety of reasons. And the goal there is just to be able to, let your team know where you're at without having to say exactly why. And so I think
Hmm.
things like that, if we can, do your point about normalizing, like we want everybody to know that, hey, we don't all have the ability to come to work the same way every single day. It's not possible. And
Hmm.
so how can we let everybody know how we're doing without getting into the details of it, unless you want to, so that
Right.
we can all step up and support each other throughout the day?
Yeah.
Because we still want to be, we still want to feel accepted, and like, we want to feel like we still belong, and we're contributing to the end goal, of what the team and the company is doing. We just can't do it the same way every single day. And so how do we support each other? So I think it's
Yeah.
a huge thing to focus on. I'm so glad that you all are that's a big piece of what you're doing.
Yeah. And I love Nina's exercise, a traffic light. In other spaces, we call that take the temperature before you move in or before you have a conversation. It's typically we do scaling, so on a rating scale, we do color as well. But I love this example of the traffic light, and this normalizing it. And I'll say this: there's also ways to have or move beyond a surface conversation, UB, and we call that level 3 conversation. It's like, level 1 is like, hey, how are things, and oh, things are good. Yeah, everything's good. Yeah, work is good. Everything's good. And then level 2 is, yeah, things are well. You know, at work and at home, you might talk about something personal. But level 3 is, can I go deep because I'm really struggling? And so, that may not necessarily be, I'll say, appropriate in some instances, but I think the framework, it gives space and holds space for somebody that really is struggling. And that is where I think there's the opportunity in this season. So that, because we all would hate for something to happen to our colleagues and never, just not know, and not know because what we didn't ask, or we didn't tap in, or we didn't wait for a response when we asked, how are you? So I just wanted to kind of share that, because I think it's such a great opportunity in this season for in the workplace to be able to normalize not feeling good around things like these exercises, and then just relanguaging groups and even book discussions around things like resistance, because again, that's where you can tap into low mood without like having to call it out. And you don't want to form a seasonal affective disorder or SAD group. Like, we're not here for that. We still want to be productive, right? We don't want to be procrastinating on our goals and objectives professionally and personally. We want to be well, but we want to be real, and we want to learn, and we want to grow. We don't want learning to just happen in the classroom, like even having the discussion groups and even book discussions around things like resistance. It's, yeah, we could learn, we could all become social learners and be better stewards of psychological safety. And that's how you change workplace culture.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, one of the things that we have to recognize is that this is a long-term play, right? We can't just get this done overnight with like you said, with just one training, but we really need to change behaviors around this. And, this kind of segues into my next question for you, is that the role of DEI and what DEI looks like at companies has changed a lot in the last year, due to George Floyd, the invasion of the Capitol by white terrorists. I mean, there's so much that's happened in the last year. Can you tell us about like what's changed and what companies need to be thinking about for 2021, how they think about DEI?
Yeah. So I think, what's changed. We know what the drivers are. So you just stated, Nina, the drivers in change and moving us to, D&I being redefined. And so what's changed is a commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So companies, as of May 25th of last year, I think by the end of that week, by May 27th, their commitment, or no, let me back up. Let me just say they're acknowledging that racism exists. I think that's one shift where prior to May 25th, we didn't hear much about that, but companies just being really bold and unapologetic about racism and being anti-racist. So that was the first, and then some sort of commitment to addressing it. Those were all of those donations that went to social justice and social impact organizations. So that was a change. I don't think that had ever happened. And then also, corporations now recommitting to their internal workforce equity, diversity, and inclusion. Prior to May 25th, guys, D&I folks were being let go. So let's just be real. That was happening before May 25th. And so the recommitment to equity, diversity, inclusion, and then internally, another change is some corporations being really bold about racism versus not just equity, diversity, and inclusion. I mean, we've received, several RFPs, and they were explicit in addressing racism. Now, I do think, there's still a lot of work to be done in that corporations. Some just don't understand, I think, the distinctions in, D&I and racism and systemic racism. But those are some of the things that have been shifting, and even in the last few weeks, we've seen major brands, some of the, our favorite brands, come out with commitments to racial justice and addressing racism and committing $100 million. And so more of that, and we are, what, 7 months removed. So and that could be based on the insurrection. It could be that. But so these are some of the things that are shifting. But now I'll share this one last thing in terms of internally what's happening. And that's a commitment to, initially it was Black people. So that came, I think, post George Floyd, but then the latter part of the year, a commitment to Black and Latinx. And I think we'll see, we'll continue to see addressing all of us in terms of racial and ethnic diversity. But then I'm really believing in a time where we don't have to just focus on one dimension, if that makes sense. Don't get me wrong, I'm a Black woman. And so, absolutely, last year I was holding space for, nope, we're talking about Black people, we're talking about racism against Black people. That was me, and then certainly, though, knowing that when we address this right now in this moment, we're creating space and we're bringing everybody along. So every dimension of diversity, but now we're going to talk about, or first we're going to talk about race and ethnicity, because we were never allowed, right, prior to May 25th. And so those are some of the things that are happening. I'll also say this, and I'm always in conversations with C-suite executives, and really sharing this blind spot. Be aware of these two things. One, accountability coming from lawmakers. Just watch the tapes of when major CEOs were called to testify and make an account to, what are you doing about diversity and inclusion. So I always want CEOs and executives and D&I folks, be aware of what's happening and the trend and the national standards coming, and where you may have to make an account for that. Also, be aware in terms of what's driving diversity and inclusion is, there's high reputational risk. You sneeze the wrong way in corporate America right now. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of social media is, they're vocal and woke, we say, in the community, meaning they're conscious. And so I think corporations definitely want to be aware of the blind spot and notice what's driving the change, who's going to be holding them accountable. As we come up on the anniversary of George Floyd being murdered, expect that there will be accountability. Folks are watching and they are going to want to know, okay, now what did you do? You said that Black Lives Matter first, and you said you were anti racist. Now, what did you do in that 1 year? So I hope that makes sense, because I'm excited about what's to come for all of us. Like, even us here together, us four, we're all going to benefit from this, but we had to start with the difficult work that had not been discussed before ever. We were never allowed to have these conversations in corporate outside of the Black Employee Resource Group or the Hispanic Employee Resource Group and the Hispanic Heritage Month. So I hope that answers the question, and it helps to shed light.
I love it all. I really do, Dee. So for me, it's like, okay, what's the practice? What's the intent of the practice? And then ultimately, what are the results of the practice, right? So can you share with all the work that you and your organization have been doing, share some results, like, so again, let's talk about accountability. So let's get down to the brass tacks. Like, let's talk about some of the amazing results that you and your team have had.
Yeah, so here's the results that we're always looking for. And if I could just back up and say, the best conversation about diversity is one informed by data, right? So we always start with some form of data, or else you have nothing to measure against. And so the results that we work towards, there's 4 areas in particular that are on the table. So there's always the area of diversity in the workforce, right? So an increase in representation for underrepresented populations. And then there is number 2, executives, right? So executive representation for underrepresented. So we look for promotions in high level positions of where it's no longer a homogenous group. McKinsey's report and so many others have proven that diverse teams outperform homogenous teams, right? And so that would be another level, the executive level of diversity. And then vendors, so suppliers. So what's your supply chain look like? Is there diversity there? And then in terms of your prime suppliers, are you holding them accountable? How diverse are they? And then wherever you do, or whoever holds your communication or marketing agency, whoever does that work, how diverse is that organization? And so, and if I could just say here, because that's where you see a lot of the challenges when you see marketing in the public domain and companies that are taking a beating, it's because there was a lack of representation, a lack of diversity within perhaps an agency. If you look at recent snafus, Burt's Bees, Macy's. Recently, we've seen it in the public domain. Pepsi. Now, all have apologized, and I don't believe any corporation means harm, but those are the issues. So those are the 4 areas for us as a company. What we do well in terms of our results is retention is one, and promotion is another. So, for instance, one of I think our biggest win, let's just say in the last year, is tech company going from 13% retention to 46% retention in terms of diverse pop, because they had a high attrition. They had a significant issue there. Another one of our clients, a CPG, over 12 to 24 months, we were able to track for gender diversity promotion. So there was for one of our clients, an invisible middle of where one or actually 2 groups were at the lower end in the entry level management positions, but there was an invisible middle, none in the mid management level to be in position and to be in the pipeline for executive. And so within 12 to 24, we were able to track results there in terms of moving up from into management ranks. So we look at retention. We look at promotion. We also look at supply chain. And so we do supplier development. It's probably only 20% of our work, but we do well in developing programs to engage specifically women of color on that track. And so we look at their number of contracts, right? We look at it, and even the value of the contracts. And so those are some of the results for us. Some of the softer side, we do have significant results as it pertains to majority population. Let's just say in many of the organizations where we work, if it's white male dominated, one of the results includes majority feeling more informed about cultural differences, right? And so there we're able to track better leadership results, which is much more intangible, but leadership results by way of learning to manage through a multicultural lens. And that's some of the work we do. Again, if they are non-Black or non people of color, non-diverse majority, it might be, again, significantly white female led and or white male led. And so those are some of the things that we've been able to do, help them to manage through a multicultural lens by giving the awareness and the education and then the experiential learning, if that makes sense.
That is what we like to call a mic drop right there, Dee. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Like actual
Wow.
data. I love it.
Well, there's such a balance there, because you do have to balance what leadership and the board, and the things that directly impact the bottom line with the greater impact or the social impact of the work you're trying to do within the community of the organization. And yeah, those are great. What a great outline. Dee, I think we're almost at time. One thing I did want to just maybe in closing talk about is the diversity of the Biden White House. What are your thoughts on that as we come into that? I mean, we're a week away. What are your thoughts? How is that shaping up? Is this part of the change we're seeing?
Yeah, so good question. I mean, what are my thoughts about it? I think it's a good thing. I think, you have all leaders need to be really thoughtful about their direct reports and who they are, you know, how they're assembling their team to represent who they represent. And so if you happen to be here in the United States, you want a leadership that looks like and represents the demographics here. So I think it's absolutely a great thing. What I also believe about Biden's cabinet is that there's lesson to be learned for corporate leaders and for private sector and actually leaders everywhere. It's pay attention. The handwriting is on the wall because while most of the US is watching, let's just say what's happening externally, know that your staff and your employees are also watching, and then they're looking at the leadership and forming their own opinions and thoughts based on that. So what I think about Biden is it's going to really inform again a lot of things as it pertains to leadership decisions and building a diverse team, diversifying your team. And so I think that's the second thing that comes out of it, to pay attention and make sure that when you look to the left and you look to the right, that the people around you are they match who you are serving, right? There's no longer, we're moving into the place where you can no longer have or run a company and benefit from people with unique differences and then not have them on your team. So whatever that is, if you're serving a specific demographic, then you need that specific demographic on your team. So it's like nothing without us, or nothing for us without us. So don't come up. You can no longer come up with, a plan for, let's just say, veterans. If Do you have any veterans on your team? Don't, you can no longer look to serve and or market and sell to, let's say, Native American, Asian American, disabled folks. Do you have those folks on your team? And so I think that's what I take most and what I'd like to share for leaders where it may be a blind spot. It's no longer going to be acceptable. And we've been moving in that direction for some time. NASDAQ and their recent announcement about a month or two ago, that in terms of requiring that boards be diverse and no longer just gender diverse, but now racial and ethnically diverse. And then also there should be some representation of LGBTQ. So again, I think that's what I take from that. And I hope that leaders now do it before there's a painful chin checking, if you will, whether it comes from your stakeholders, your shareholders are now, they're in the hot seat, whether it comes from your consumers, whether it comes from social and embarrassment moment, or whether it comes from a letter of inquiry from Congress. So I hope that makes sense. But those are just some of my thoughts. Yeah.
No, I think, yeah, you're right. And there's a feeling of intentionality behind it. And I think that's often what's missing. We do a lot of training around bias and just, our brains, I mean, often we make choices because that's what's comfortable for us. And that
Yeah.
goes to how we build our teams and who we surround ourselves with. But at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, it's there, you have to be intentional. And I love it, what you said. And that's, I heard that from several engineering managers a few years ago. How are we supposed to build a product for a diverse group of customers when my team is all white guys? You can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not representing. You're
Yeah.
representing one small portion. So I love that.
Yeah. And can I say this? Yeah. And can I say this real quick, Yubi?
Please.
You're going to win. That guy, let's just go back to that guy who said that. He's going to win with diversity because cognitively, right, all of us have bias and blinders, right? We have the B&B, we have bias and we have blinders. And so if I'm working over here by myself, and let's just shake the guy that you just mentioned, then he's limited. But the moment you expand your team, baby, you're in this game to win. And if you want to be a great leader right now, if you really want to stay competitive, if you really want to be in and play the long game in terms of value in your brand, your business, your company, diversity is a cognitive diversity. And I'll get out of the specifics, but if we think about it from a cognitive diversity perspective, but how you're going to get to cognitive diverse, folks, is you've got to have folks who are unique and different. So that's the end. I'm sorry. I promise. That's it.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
That's awesome. And Dee, I think that's a great note to wrap up on. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been an incredible conversation. And I think our listeners will have so many key things to walk away from to bring back to their company. So once again, thank you, Dee, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, Mike and Yubi, as usual, for being great co-hosts. And I guess, as usual, come to chooseinclusion.com to check out all of our episodes, engage with us on our social media feeds through there, and we will catch you all next time. Take care, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.